The word nostalgia has been associated with film so much recently. It seems like every conversation I have with someone about movies or TV shows, the word nostalgia comes up at least once, whether it be a good or bad thing. It's clear nostalgia has a power on film, and that power has only gotten more complicated. I have noticed, though, nostalgia affects film and the audience in many drastic ways. One of the ways nostalgia affects film is by how certain movies or certain TV shows use our love for nostalgia and put it into their movie or TV show. Whether the nostalgia is being used by putting the audience into a different time period or a different point in time, like a different era, for a specific type of audience, like say what Stranger Things does. Stranger Things uses nostalgia for people that grew up in the 80s. Stranger Things have many references to like different things in the 80s, like the music, the clothing style, and so much more, and all of that is used as nostalgia for people that grew up in the 80s. Then there's the nostalgia of just bringing back old movies and TV shows and seeing our favorite characters again. And when they bring back those old characters or old movies, there's always a ton of references to the original material. Sometimes there's a little bit too much of like nostalgia baiting in the entire movie. All of that is a different conversation, but either way, movies and TV shows kind of weaponize nostalgia in a way, and it usually affects the audience in many different ways, sometimes in a good way, and some people don't really like nostalgia, so it could affect them in a bad way. A lot of the time, nostalgia is used to target a specific audience and bring them in to see their movie or TV show. And it's also a crowd pleaser for many fans as well. Nostalgia can also affect the way we perceive certain movies and TV shows. When we grow up with a movie or TV show and really enjoy it as a kid, we usually overlook the flaws that our favorite childhood TV show or movie had. And due to this happening so much, like this is a pattern that's happened forever, ever since movies have existed. Almost every movie, whether it be good or bad, years later are praised by the people who grew up with said movie or TV show. I find it fascinating that so many movies that were once considered bad and were really crapped on by so many people, by critics, by fans at the time, or by the people who went to go see that specific movie. All this hate for when the movie released, years later, is pretty much praised by a lot of people. Like some examples of movies that were once considered bad, and these are like recent movies, for example, like Batman Forever. A lot of people would say the Joel Schumacher movies, Batman movies, were considered bad. But years later, people are doing video essays on those movies about how good or underrated or secret masterpieces these movies were. Now, I'm not here to judge anybody for thinking this way. Maybe these movies are secretly masterpieces. Maybe they were just overhated. I believe film is very subjective, so I'm not going to say these people were wrong or these people were like blinded by nostalgia or whatever. I'm not here for any. This is mainly observational. There's no objective truths when it comes to film, in my opinion. Maybe some things are objective, but at the end of the day, that's a subjective conversation. Also, something like Indiana Jones, The Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, another movie that was once pretty trashed on at the time. Years later, people that grew up with that movie are now calling it overhated and underappreciated. Again, video essays are being made talking about how this movie was never really that bad. Also, just look at like Reddit pages, or you can go to IMDb and look at the old reviews for when the movie came out compared to the reviews that are more recent. And again, like it seems like the majority of people that feel like Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is a good movie or underrated movie or underappreciated, secretly good, were people that grew up with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. And it is possible that this movie was just overhated at the time. It's also possible that the people that feel a movie like The Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, that the movie they grew up with, are blinded by their nostalgia and overlook certain flaws that the movie has. Now, the most recent and most talked about example of like this phenomenon of movies that were once disliked are now liked, and it could be because of nostalgia. I think there is a possibility that this could be the case, or it might not be because of nostalgia and this movie was just overhated for no reason. The most recent and most popular example of this being the case is Revenge of the Sith. You could say the entire Star Wars prequels in general are now considered really good movies compared to when they first came out. People were trashing on those movies. Based on what I have seen, I just want to talk about this specific movie because This movie went from being a bad or just a mediocre movie to many fans, to now being considered a masterpiece by so many fans. And I see some people even saying this is the best Star Wars movie of all time, one of the best movies ever made. This movie should have won like a ton of Oscars. Like I said, based off of what I have seen, Revenge of the Sith is really highly praised compared to when it first came out. Now, I'm not here to debate whether Revenge of the Sith is truly good or not, because that's not what this video is about. I just noticed how people who grew up with Revenge of the Sith truly see this movie as a masterpiece today. Now, you could say some have always seen this movie as a masterpiece, but their voices haven't been heard till now because of the internet. I've heard this argument many times, which could be true. It could also be true that this movie is a flat-out masterpiece and the people who watched this movie and disliked it back then were blinded by nostalgia of the OT. I don't know and I don't care. I've heard all of the arguments. We could go back and forth on what the truth is, but that's a complicated answer with many layers in my opinion. I do think 80% of the people who call Revenge of the Sith a masterpiece, though, are all mainly people that grew up with the prequels. If that wasn't the case, then we wouldn't have old Reddit threads, old IMDb reviews, and old YouTube videos saying this movie was bad or whatever you want to call it. Revenge of the Sith was either affected by the fans of the movie being blinded by its flaws to the point where they now believe the movie is a masterpiece, or the people who disliked Revenge of the Sith were blinded by the OT nostalgia of those films and they wanted the prequels to be exactly like the OT, which is why they consider Revenge of the Sith and the rest of the prequels bad. Either way, Revenge of the Sith is the most popular example of the power nostalgia has in film, because either way you look at it, nostalgia is involved when it comes to Revenge of the Sith. Now, another thing that I also think that happened as to why this movie is now viewed in a better light is I think people have grown softer on this movie just due to letting their hatred for it go. That could be the case for why a lot of these movies like Indiana Jones, The Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, the old Joel Schumacher Batman movies are now looked at more positively. I'm not sure why there is a trend of looking at something you once disliked and now saying it is good, but it is a trend that does exist with so many movies, and that trend has existed since movies have existed. Whether this is a good or bad trend is up to debate. It's just funny to me how many people just lose their dislike for a movie due to a variety of different reasons. For me, once I dislike a movie or TV show, I hardly ever change my mind or reverse my opinion. I actually have the opposite trend to where I used to like a movie or TV show, then I rewatched the movie or show like years later, and then I end up disliking it when I used to like it. I do believe though that nostalgia is causing us to blind certain aspects of movies and TV shows and ignore its flaws, more than I think it's people just losing their hatred for a certain movie or TV show. I'm not coming from a side where these movies are looked upon in a better light when they were once considered bad is a bad thing or just plain wrong to do. This is all observational. Well, I do have my opinions on if I think these movies are good or not, or certain movies should just stay bad or whatever, but those are strictly opinions, and we all have our different opinions on what our favorite movies and TV shows are. I'm also not someone who claims things are objective at the end of the day or tries to be the smartest guy in the room. I really believe in subjectivity, and yes, there are some objective things in filmmaking like I did say earlier, but it's not really so black and white that so many smartasses claim there is. It's very rare a film is objectively bad, and even that statement is subjective. I bet in 15 years, the movies that are looked down upon today will be looked on positively, or maybe they won't. I can't predict the future, but like I said, bad movies or movies that split the audience in half at the time and are looked upon in a negative light for some reason get looked at in a positive light years later because of mostly nostalgia. And then there's also the people who once disliked the movie look back on it and think it wasn't too bad, but nostalgia being involved with a certain movie that was once considered bad is the bigger thing, the bigger trend that usually happens. Look, nostalgia affects me too at the end of the day. I'm not afraid to admit it like some people are. I feel there's some movies and TV shows I believe are good or even great, but I could be wrong because I could be blinded by nostalgia from growing up with that certain movie or TV show. I feel a big example of this is the TV show Arrow for me. I grew up watching Arrow. People love to hate on Arrow and say it's a bad show, and I will defend this show to the day I die. Like, I do not see why many people believe this show to be so bad. I mean, yes, the show has flaws, but I still love the show, and honestly, I believe there were so many great moments in that series, and that could be just me being blinded by nostalgia. But when I rewatch this show, I really don't see like this super bad show that many people say. I will do a video about Arrow eventually, but I will admit I am pretty blinded by nostalgia when it comes to Arrow, to the point where I love the show and I think it's great. But I also have to say it gets way too much hate. My favorite Spider-Man actor of all time is Sam Raimi, purely because of nostalgia. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I hear the crap that my friends say and my YouTube comments say when I talk about Sam Raimi being my favorite Spider-Man. And every time I say that he's my favorite Spider-Man actor, I admit it's only because I played the Amazing Spider-Man games so much as a kid, to the point where when I think of Spider-Man's voice and what he's supposed to sound like, I think of his voice. Plus, I do think he does a solid job in general. Also, I gotta admit, I do love when certain movies and TV shows have nostalgia by bringing back certain movies and seeing the old references to the old movies when they come back for another sequel. The biggest example of this is what The Force Awakens did. The Force Awakens was a big nostalgic ride with many references, hearing the music back. And yes, I know they were weaponizing the nostalgia that I have for Star Wars, but I didn't feel it was overbearing, and I enjoyed the nostalgia that was in The Force Awakens. Now, I'm not at the point when it comes to nostalgia where all I need to enjoy a movie is just a nostalgia fest throughout the entire movie. Ignore the plot, ignore the characters. Sometimes I think too much focus on the nostalgia and not enough on the story and characters is really bad because it makes the movie feel like a lazy cash grab. Again, I'm not here to tell others how they are supposed to enjoy a movie because I hate when others tell me how to enjoy a movie. So I will never do that to anyone either. But for me personally, I need more than just nostalgia for me to enjoy a movie or a TV show. Sometimes people really do enjoy the story even though it has a ton of nostalgia in it. But I've seen some people only like a movie because their favorite character and franchise returned, then ignored everything else in the movie. Just seeing something nostalgic makes some people just enjoy the movie no matter what, and I respect that. Nostalgia in film is crazy powerful. It affects audiences in many different ways, and it's very interesting the way the power nostalgia has in film.